Glory to you, Lord Christ.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What is it you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant us to sit, one on your right hand and one at your left in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you're asking for. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They replied, We are able. Then Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be a slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. So for the last 2 weeks, you all had readings from the book of Job, and I don't know whether they were preached about or not, since I wasn't here, but so I'm going to give you a little recap of the book of Job. Job was a wealthy man, well-respected man, lots of children, lots of animals, livestock. That was how wealth was measured at that time. And so Satan comes to God and says, essentially, the only reason that Job is obedient to you, the only reason Job is faithful to you, is because he's been blessed. He said you've set your fence of protection around him, and that's why he's been so wonderfully blessed. And so God agrees to drop that, to allow Satan to attack Job. Now that's a whole nother issue we're not going to get into about why that is or not, but the point being, God allows this. And so Job loses his wealth. He loses his family. And then finally he loses his health. And as you can imagine, he begins to question some things. Right? And his friends come over to help him out. Right? Particularly after the first day. The first day is when he loses all his herds. He loses his children. He loses all kinds of things. And they come and sit with him for 7 days. And then after the 7 days, they begin to speak. And as friends will do, they say to Job, well, this is your fault, Job. Right? You did this. It must be your sin that's causing these problems. Can't think of any other explanation. And so we have 35 or 30 plus chapters of this back and forth. Of Job saying, no, I've been righteous, I've been faithful. And saying, it doesn't look like it. Pretty sure this is your fault. And there's a lot of insight and a lot of wit and humor, really, in the book of Job in a lot of ways. But that's the basic thing. Is Job saying, I don't understand this. And he begins to question God. Now that sounds familiar, I suspect, right? How many of us have been through hard times and said, why me? Why is this happening to me? And even Job goes so far, as many of you might have done, as saying, look at all these other people. These terrible people that do terrible things, and yet they have long lives and have success. Why me? I think we've all probably asked that in some way, shape, or form at some point in our lives. And maybe every day, I don't know. But the point being. This is the thing that leads up to this chapter that we see today. Why me? Why would a God who claims to love, who claims to be merciful, who claims to want to do good, why would he allow this? And so God, in today's reading, doesn't answer those questions. Instead, he takes another tack. And let's listen to it. It says that God comes in a whirlwind. Comes in a mighty power of a whirlwind. And he says, who is it that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? In other words, who's saying this ignorant stuff? Who has the authority? And he says to him, gird up your loins like a man. And I will question you, and you will declare to me. What he means by that is be the person that I created you to be. And then we'll have a conversation. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but that conversation happens a lot. I have quit whining and acting like a whatever. And then we'll talk about this. Okay? That's what God's saying to him. Quit pitching a fit, and then we'll have a conversation about this. So God goes on. It says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurement? Surely you know. Got to be a little smart aleck here, right? Because obviously you're questioning what I do. So tell me about the foundations of the earth. Tell me why it is the size it is, why it was put where it was put, how it's built. Surely you must know that. Such a simple thing in light of all you claim to know here. Or who stretched a line upon it, or where its base is sunk, or where its cornerstone are laid? He said, can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that the flood of waters can cover you? In other words, do you have control over the natural world? Are you able to call upon it and summon its forces at will? Oh, you're not? Oh, well, okay. Well, let's move on then. You can't do that. It says, who can tilt the water skins of heavens? Again, who can make it rain? Or who provides for the ravens and its prey when its young ones cry out and wonder about for lack of food? In other words, can you sustain life? God is making a point here. He's making a point of his power and majesty in the face of Job's questions. And I want to make a point here that I want you to hear before I go on. What I'm saying here is not that God doesn't allow us to ask questions. But what God is saying is, who are you to question me? Is that difficult? Make sense? He's not saying you can't ask questions. He's not saying we can't wonder, we can't have doubts, that we can't struggle. But he's saying when it comes to what I do, you're not in a position to question my authority. Now that's something that we as modern readers don't particularly like to hear. I think in the ancient world, Job is a contemporary of Abraham. So you're going back somewhere around 2000 BC. In the ancient world, this is what they expected from their God. A God who was powerful, who was authoritative. But in the modern world, we tend to not respond as well to that God, right? We want a God who's a little more sensitive to our needs. A God who's a little more understanding and patient. And I'm not saying that God isn't all of those things. But God is also powerful and mighty. And God is also the one who says, it's not your place to question the decisions I make. Not only is it not your place, but he's making the point here, you don't have the facts to even question those things. You can't even begin to comprehend what is behind all of these decisions. Our finite minds are not capable of understanding the majesty and awe of God. And God is trying to make that point to Job. He says, I've asked you these little simple things like creating the earth. Were you there for that? Do you understand how it was done? If you don't understand that, how can you understand all these other things that you're trying to understand? It says you can't. But he'll go on later, and we'll see next week, to invite Job to ask for understanding. In other words, God can grant some understanding, but Job in and of himself is not going to comprehend the fullness of all that's going on here. And as we as human beings tend to do, he and his friends had come up with kind of the simple solution. They'd say, well, it must be your fault, Job. It must be your sin that's the problem. When in fact, both God and Satan saw Job as a righteous man. Job didn't have the facts, and neither did his friends. He didn't understand what was going on. So for us, what does it mean? Again, it doesn't mean that we can't ask questions. But what it does mean is that we shouldn't question the righteousness of God. We shouldn't question whether God has our best interests at heart. See, this is what Job understood from the get-go, because in his first response, he said, God is good. I know God is merciful. I know that God has my best interests at heart. He said, all that I had came from God. And when it's taken away now, I'm not going to curse God for that. So he understood that. But through the process, through his friends, he begins to question God's motives. He begins to question the nature of God. And that's the question that is a problem here. He begins to question, is God really good? Does God really love me? Is God looking out for me? That's the struggle. And that's what this story is about. Accepting that, for one, we can't comprehend all of what's going on in the world around us. We can't understand everything about evil and good, the eternal struggle. We can't know the full nature of God. But what we're called to do, what Job was called to do, is to be faithful, to trust that those things that we do know about God, that God is loving, God is kind, God is merciful, that those things are true, even when it doesn't appear to be the case for us at that moment. We have to remain faithful and not question the nature of God's love. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, for the many blessings you bestowed upon us. I pray that you would help us to understand the difference between asking questions and questioning you. Help us to be faithful in our endeavors. And even in the face of brokenness, in the face of loss, in the face of fear and doubt, help us, Lord, to trust in you, to turn to you with faith, to turn to you in all that we do. All this we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen.